So welcome to the tech evaluation in the deep tech session. By the way, this picture that you see over here is is a patent issued in 1869, and I think this patent is something about some flying sort of a contraption which a man can wear and fly. So I found it very interesting in the context of this talk. Um, so overall, I think we are going to talk about a couple of frameworks, and then in the end we will say the frameworks don't matter. But again, we will talk about the frameworks, and essentially the broad framework around evaluating tech is actually forming an hypothesis and then validating the hypothesis and then going back and forth at it, right? So at a very core level. And one thing I wanted to say in this presentation is essentially, evaluating tech can be explained at many different levels. But when I was putting this together, I actually realized, and I was reminded of a story. So I'll just tell you the story first, and then come to this. Is that there was a guy who ran a industrial shed, and once his machine went down, so he called an engineer. The machine is not working. Please look at it. So the engineer, he looked around. He listened to the noise coming from different sections. He did so many things, and then finally he opened little one screw somewhere and hammered it slowly, and then screwed it back, and it started working. So this guy was very impressed that, oh man, just a very small thing it was, and it worked. And when the bill came, it was like $1,000. So this guy was very upset that, why $1,000? You just put a small hammer. So send me the breakup of the bill. So he sent the breakup of the bill, and in the breakup of the bill, there were two line items. The line item first was figuring out what is wrong, $999, right? And hammering it was $1, right? So that was the breakup of that bill, and that actually is an inspiration of this talk as well. That when we are evaluating the tech in the deep tech, the context of that tech is actually much more important to evaluate. And if I may say that, the context of the tech actually can be evaluated very well by not having a very deep technical background also. But when you get into technical evaluation of the tech, then you need some kind of technical background. So large part of my presentation today and talk today would be actually focused on the context of the tech, which actually reduces the problem, that reduces it to some few questions that on the tech side that you can diligence then. And just feel free to ask a question whenever you have it. So let's talk about first thesis, which I call as an inside out approach. And there are basically 5 questions to be explored here in evaluating the context of the tech. We all start with, what is the core innovation? We got to find out, we got to distill it down that, okay, in this tech, what is the core innovation in the tech, right? And second question then we follow up it with is, will it make a 10x impact? And 10x is more of a indicative measure, which basically means that will it create something which is distinctly apart from the state of the art, or is it an incremental innovation to what exists? Why now? We've heard so many stories of timing of things going wrong. My career is riddled with lot of tech work that I did, which never went out in the market because we were working on something which was not needed ever. And so why now is a very important question to answer in all of this. The fourth question is, who else, what else, why will they win, right? So it's more of a who else is sort of look at competition, who else is doing it, what else is that alternatives, what else can replace this or have something else can be taken over from this, and why will they win, right? So that would be why, what is the unique thing about about this venture, this tech, that will help them win the market. And the last question is, can they? So is this team capable? Is it feasible? And all those kind of questions. Let me take a pause here and see if there are questions on this framework. And we will apply all this framework on the case studies just in a bit.
So quick question. When you say 10x impact, it's to the user, right? End user.
Yes, the 10x impact in terms of the customers. Yeah, what do the customers get out of it?
And Manish, who's forming this hypothesis? Is this the fund or the product team, technology team?
Of course, the fund, right? So this is all from a VC angle. How do you evaluate tech?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So this is one framework. Just keep it in the back of the mind. Very simple. 5 questions. What is the core innovation? What is the 10x impact? Why is this now a right time to do it? What else? Who else? Available? Then this is all like competition and differentiation and can be, right? So we'll come back to this a little bit. And now let me make an attempt to simplify the word of startups. And this is a little bit of a stretch, so bear with me. But it's a very interesting concept that I came up with while doing this presentation. I was not aware of this in full awareness, but once developing this talk, it sort of kind of fell in place, and hopefully it will make sense. So the fundamental assumption here is that any business, actually any startup, is at the core of it solving some sort of a demand and supply problem. Okay. And this curve can be a lot more richer on both axes, but in the context of deep tech, I have taken these dimensions and I'll come to that. And if demand and supply are not vibing with you, then you can use these proxies as demand to be a need and supply to be a solution, right? And then there are dimensions around it. So in terms of solution or supply, in the context of deep tech again, you could have a simpler tech, you could have a harder tech and hard tech. Differentiation being is simpler tech is something that somebody can make if some smart people can come together and make. Like Swiggy is tech, but in my mind it's a simpler tech. So is Ola, right? These things are not there's nothing innovative to be done in some sense. You can put these products together with a bunch of smart people. Harder tech is something which is realizable, but there is a moat around it. There is something that you have figured out which other people haven't, or there is some boundary you have broken in terms of IP. Essentially, it means that if you put same bunch of smart people together with that problem, they may or may not come out with a solution in a finite time of period, right? And hard tech is probably still in the labs where research is going on and still it is not a commercial solution. On the other axis, the demand or need can be thought of as something which I am unaware of completely. I have not thought about it. Something that I am vaguely aware of, but it is a latent demand, and something which is very apparent and aware, and I need it now, right? So this is an attempt to simplify the word, and it will become very clear when I take some examples. But any questions right now on this? Okay. So just for our discussion, when we will take examples, I've just nomenclatured them as zone A, B, C, D, and E. And if you have to make comments which lie in between the zones, then you can say A, B, B, C, A, D, and so on and so forth, right? So just as a nomenclature. So let's see what these characteristics of these zones are, right? And some of them are very simple, right? Where unthought of, unaware, these sections are more of it is not needed or it is too early, nobody wants it. More of a experimentation fun zone in some sense, but these 5 zones are actually of a little bit more importance if we can think about it, right? So let me just go over them, and let me start from here. In an aware but latent and a simpler tech, you will so there is some demand, but it's latent. So there is a lot of evangelization done needed to actually push it into some other sector, right? And there could be a first mover advantage, but there could also be a disadvantage, because once you make the demand latent, since it is replicable, then somebody else can come and also play in the market, like Ola did with Uber before, and so on and so forth, right? Zomato food is doing now with Swiggy did before, etc. In the E sector, it is essentially, since it is not so simple to make, right? You still have the evangelization cost and effort to go through. But since there are lesser players, therefore the first movers can still win, right? And make a great case out of it. So let me just take a couple of examples. By the way, I've been fortunate or unfortunate enough to work probably in all these dabbas. So let me just take one example of this and this, which were my last 2 startups actually. So I founded Let's Venture before this, and I felt that we started operating here. It was a latent demand. When we talk to angels investors, they say, "ठीक है, मतलब, there is a platform, fine, we will do it." But the angel investment is not the top of the mind need for them, right? To discover startups, etc. On the other hand, for the startup side, it was aware and apparent demand, but from the investor side, it was a latent demand, right? Let's Venture is an online platform, not so hard tech to build. So we built it, and slowly with evangelization, I think it slowly moved towards something like this, right? Whereas these products are hard to build and can be very risky, but we got lucky with a product called Slingbox, which we did in 2005. So for those who don't know, Slingbox lets you watch your TV anywhere in the world, and you put the Slingbox in your home, connect it to your TV and internet, and then you can watch your TV anywhere in the world, interact with it, whatever else. Remember 2005, where there was no no way to watch live TV or live sports through Hotstar or any other cloud streaming service, because there was none, right? So people kind of had this latent demand. Yeah, I want to watch live TV when I'm not at my home, but it was not a very aware demand, right? And Slingbox, as you know, was a very complex product. We had almost 75 plus patents on this, but we cracked that technology and we launched it, and we then pulled it here actually. So our when we launched the product, it was a good success over a few months, because our marketing team and CEO did a great job of evangelization that and bring that demand into an aware and apparent space, right? And in the first column, first row is actually slightly easier to understand, right? Aware and apparent business demand with a supply, which could be a simple tech, harder tech, or hard tech. So simple tech could be examples like Swiggy, Ola, etc. In aware and apparent and harder tech examples, quick examples. Maybe I should ask you guys, what is a quick example in this sector? So this sector is characterized by, it's ripe for disruption. There is a possibility of building a strong moat, and therefore you can rule the category, right? Whereas it's a good business can be built, but you have to have some way of standing above the competition, or the market has to be so massive that there are several players can exist in it. But coming back, any quick examples of zone B?
Would
Wearables?
smartphone? Yeah.
Okay.
Call center
smart-
automation.
Smartphone anybody can build today. So I don't know.
No, earlier when they started, just
Okay.
at the point of inflection. Yeah.
Okay.
I was thinking of call center automation.
Call center automation, yeah, could fall there. Yeah, absolutely, right? Because it's with AI, etc., it is not very easy to do that strong job. But we are seeing quite a few startups in there. But yes, maybe. Yeah. Any example in C? So C is characterized by obviously that you are still working on research, but these products are very much in demand. And with the current COVID around, I think you can think of many examples. If someone had a vaccine here, or even a good screening solution, then that would suddenly be pulled into B, right? Does this make sense? Let me pause.
Hey, Manish,
Then,
so I'm just trying to put other products I can think of. Where will you put Apple AirPods? Maybe in that case, would it go in like very low end, unaware category for start, and now it has become like a real revenue generator for Apple?
yeah, I think AirPods would probably be. I don't think it's that harder a tech. It was more of a design innovation, and they did solve some problems, but it is not so simple a tech also. So I would put it somewhere on this side. I'll put it somewhere closer to this boundary, but on this side. And on the aware and apparent demand, probably it was a latent demand when they launched it, but now it's a very apparent and aware demand. In fact, so many other products have also come, right? So slowly that sector is actually moving towards A slowly. Okay. All right. So obviously, as a deep tech fund, right, what I wanted to say is that probably this is the zone B is probably looking most attractive, right? Because there you have a moat from a tech perspective, as well as a demand which can be met today. There is another thing I wanted to cover within this framework is about momentums, right? So quick question. Given time, right, with time, tech will move in which direction?
Things will become simpler.
Yes. So tech always moves in the left direction on this, right? So it becomes harder, and I mean the other way around. Still in the labs becomes realizable and simpler, right? And therefore the need for constant innovation for startups to stay ahead. What about the demand?
Same, it moves up.
Upwards. Yeah.
Is it? Any other thoughts on demand?
If tech's becoming simpler, it should be able to solve a lot more problems than what are apparent today, right?
Sure. So market moves in, but so tech is very clear, right? With things, the same things become easier to do. With market or demand or need, is there a momentum play which is predictable?
Yeah, I think market will expand, right? Once the tech becomes simpler and more realizable.
Can you think of examples where market has gone out from apparent and aware, it has just disappeared?
Would cameras or
Like,
something come under that category?
Cameras, like the smaller cameras, have just gone out of the market, right? It is either cell phone or SLRs of high for serious photographers. Similarly,
increasingly,
landlines have.
too.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Local backups too, like most of the corporate local backups are also
Sure.
moving.
They are disappearing, right? So in my opinion, and I could be wrong, but unlike tech, market momentums are not predictable. They could go in either direction. Some things may become more. Another way of looking at it is there is another perspective on it, that if certain markets will always die after becoming aware and apparent, because something else will come to satisfy that demand, right? So but it is not so trivial in the case of figuring out the demand as it is in the case of tech in terms of momentum.
Yeah, I think what I meant was when tech becomes more realizable and simpler, the market does expand for that tech and its applications.
It does.
And in the process, displaces many of the incumbent.
Correct. But after that, it could also fall off.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Because it will be taken over by the next innovation. I think this camera example is a great example, right? I still remember I was very excited about you going to the US and buying this 10x zoom camera, which was a handheld camera, Panasonic camera, right? But who goes and buys that today? Much better cameras are in the phone. Or if you really want a high-end camera for sort of almost DSLR level, then you have to go and buy a DSLR. So that middle zone of cameras has sort of disappeared. Okay. So I think one way of distinguishing between the top two rows is essentially when it is aware, apparent, and you need it now, in respect of all the hardships that are there to take it on, right? And if there is anything which stops you from adopting that, right, then it goes into the second column, second row.
Okay.
And this is just a very, again, if obviously if we take 5 people, everybody will have a different marking on it. But this is a simpler framework to figure out where your startup is, and and you can make then a judgment call whether this is something that you want to back or not back, depending upon the momentum of the technology and the momentum of the. All right. So now let's get to our case study. So I hope all of you have seen the Wysa information that we sent out, right? So we will try and build the hypothesis here, and then we will see how to validate it, right? So in terms of building the hypothesis, I have the 5 questions here. So I'll now probably ask some of you to tell me in very, like, if you are talking 2 sentences, you've already lost the plot, right? So 1 sentence and probably a few words. What is the core innovation of Wysa? What is the core promise of that innovation? What is the core innovation of technology that these guys have cracked? You can use chat or just unmute yourself and talk, but very short and crisp answers.
Discrete mental health available at your fingertips.
Okay. But that's not core innovation of the tech. That's a core promise of what it does. So here we're talking about what is a core innovation. Human-like counseling using AI. Aniket says that, okay.
Yeah, empathetic AI. That's what they call it.
Empathetic AI, but that's okay, fine. I'll take that. But I think you have to still peel a layer. What does it mean in the tech?
I think NLP in the in how they've applied it to really pick up signals that you're talking, which can go back to emotional health. So NLP to really assess emotional health.
You said 3 sentences, but I'll still take it.
Yeah, I know.
So,
I know that.
There is some meat in it though, right? NLP is a keyword here, right? As applied to mental health is also a keyword. Now NLP has been all around, right? You can see so many chatbots around, right? So what is it about this NLP engine which makes it special that it qualifies as a deep tech and as a core innovation?
What
Anybody?
I liked
Strong.
about this, Manish, was that it actually guides you back towards the therapy like
That's
structure.
the outcome of that tech. We are still talking about what is the tech. So this is an important question to understand, because see, it is about that hammer example. We are trying to figure out the real core innovation that this has, because otherwise you can't really do a tech evaluation on it, right? And we'll come to the your points, love. They are going to come in the next bullets. So what is it about the NLP as applied? Because there's so many chatbots, right? So what is so unique about it, and what is the core innovation these guys have cracked within the NLP?
So,
This is a chocolate question.
sure. I'll go. So I assume that these guys have figured out that certain text patterns map to certain mental health conditions, and that is has been.
Fine. I mean, okay. This is not incorrect, but that's not hitting the nail on.
I guess because in this case, you're not being instructional in terms of interpreting voice. You're trying to actually interpret what is going on in your mind when you say something, which you're not able to articulate.
Anybody else?
So sentiment is what I was going to say. That it understands the sentiment of the conversation.
Actually, sentiment is a great word, I feel.
None of the answers are wrong, but I would, I'll tell you how I understood this technology, right? So obviously it's an NLP engine. It is based on mental health conversations, which a lot of companies can do. But what they really stood out for me was on two fronts. One is it's a bounded NLP engine from an unbounded input. So what I mean is, it's an unbounded input, right? I can throw whatever I feel like at Wysa, right? It's a free text input. I can do whatever. But Wysa has to map that to a certain number of bounded outputs, which are clinically safe and make sense for your mental health condition. Am I able to articulate that? Right? That to me was a non-trivial tech problem.
Just to understand this better, so the input text is actually fairly generic. You're saying it can map.
Anybody can say anything to it.
Okay. Well, it's
right?
Not directed questioning. It's just anything.
Anything I can say. No, it's a free text bot.
Manish, that's kind of what I was saying, but I wasn't able to word it correctly. I actually used the Wysa app and I saw that feature.
I think what you were saying will come in the next bullet. And there is a value in what you were saying. But I just wanted to make sure that we have understood. So why is it important to understand this? One way is to analyze this. So what is the second thing is exactly the mental health part that all of you got it, right? Which is very simple from the context. So NLP engine trained on a mental health, there can be a lot of differentiation within that. There is no denying that fact. But the fact that it has to be clinically safe, the fact that it can take free text inputs and map it to one of the clinically safe inputs which is relevant to you, makes the rendition of this engine much more harder to do. Are you able to connect with that thought?
Mm-hmm.
So that to me became the source of, okay, when this thing penny dropped in my head, then I started investigating and validating that hypothesis more. But and remember, this building the hypothesis and validating the hypothesis doesn't happen in one straight line. So it is a series of conversations going back and forth, but ultimately you start to appreciate the ultimate core tech that they have built.
Manish, actually, in most chatbots, when you need this in most chatbots, right? If it's a chatbot meant for, I don't know, the FMCG industry, for example, it should understand the taxonomy, the ontology, and it should understand what those conversations look like, understand those words, be able to take the intent from it and map it to various kinds of responses and
correct
and flows, right? So,
but the cost of going wrong in those engines is very low. So it has to be clinically safe, and it has to be in most of those chatbots, when you give a free text input which is not mapped, it will say what I did not understand, right? It will go to some default condition of doing this. But here you have to make sense of it and keep moving forward.
So Manish, if you want, I can give a quick example of my use case with Wysa for Arun's clarity. Like I was just chatting with the bot and I was purposefully trying to be random. Like I had a loss, I want help. And then it asked me question, what happened? Tell me more. And I was completely going random. Like my dog died And the chatbot kept replying in a way that was safe and was guiding me towards a constructive
And that's the point,
conversation.
right? So you
Like,
validated this
yeah.
hypothesis. So it
Yeah.
sounds simple on the paper, but once you are able to realize that I need to diligence around this, and that separates this product from some other products in the category, then you start to sort of, the clarity begins to emerge whether you should put money in Wysa versus XYZ in the same category. Remember, we are looking at it from an investment perspective. Okay. So moving on from the core innovation. So what is the 10x differentiation they bring? Quick ones. Use chat or say.
So you can serve a lot more customers who need this
Absolutely, right?
service.
Absolutely, right? So mental health has to be scalable. I think this is where a lot of first inputs came. There is a lot of inhibition, by the way, right? Talking to a coach, whereas there's no inhibition here. It's very friendly with teenagers. It is 2 a.m. and you are not able to sleep. You want to talk to a coach who's going to take your call, but Wysa will, right? So those kind of things. And we'll explore this in the next couple of slides again. Timing. Any comments on timing? Why now?
So I think tech-wise, there's a certain amount of maturity that the chatbots have become way better than they have ever been.
That's a tech timing. Anybody else on the timing?
Mental health burden is becoming very publicly aware.
Right? It is part of our lives. In advanced countries, therapists are backlogged massively. Right? If you go to UK NHS asking for a psychotherapist session, you will get appointment in 4 months. So they've started recommending Wysa now. That go and talk to Wysa in the meantime. There is no way without tech you can scale to cater to this demand. Okay.
So actually, timing should include both, right? The need, the timing for the massive need, but also, as somebody pointed out, timing that the channel is available in everybody's hand, which is it can work on your smartphone, and a lot of people have smartphone. So I think both ads.
Sure. Any comments on why now? Why? Alternative competition and differentiation. Anything that stands out?
I think Manish, this category in general is now kind of getting a lot more awareness than before.
Sure. But how will they stand out? Why, if it is getting awareness, there are a lot of other products also coming, right? So it may not be a great investment decision for you to make.
I think they talk a lot more about personalization and this coach aspect of the problem, versus some of the others, more popular ones like Headspace and Calm are more around creating habits or situations which will generally help you relax, but they're not personalized to solve your issues or your mental health worries.
Yeah. I think what we realized, right, that all these answers are correct, but there was one clear differentiator which stood out from the core as well, right? This Wysa is probably the only app in the entire category which can really take free text and not lead you astray, right? Like what Love's experience is. It really talks back to you, which we didn't find. We actually played around with other apps. We didn't find the same capability of free text. And that validated a lot about the core engine, which we did from a technical architecture as well, but it also, from the results also, you could sort of get a sense of it, right? And lastly, the team, which obviously we felt, it's very passionate about the cause and comes with deep understanding, both for technology as well as the domain, right? So gives you some idea of, how to go about building this thesis, right? And then so try and answer these questions as much clarity as possible. Then we go and validate that. So again,
Manish, one question. Sorry, maybe.
Bolo. Go ahead.
Sorry, Manish, one question. More since you've played around with the product, I was just wondering, and I think it was there in the architecture, but what does it do if you keep saying, I don't know? For example, a lot of people just anxiety starts with saying, I'm just feeling.
Why don't you try and tell us at the end of this
fair enough.
talk, right? So another way of looking at this, right? This is our generalized model for digital health and many other platforms where there's a large demand base. There is a lot of people to be catered to, but there are very only high quality resources available to cater to that. So psychotherapy fits in that, education sometimes fit in that, doctors fit in that, etc., right? And the only way to make this enable and democratized, make this available to all with the right quality at the cost that they want is to actually make a tech platform which is AI enabled and learns from the high quality resources on the top and democratizes and makes it available to all, right? So that was our fundamental one diagram thesis for looking at companies of this nature. Yeah, does that make sense? So now comes the fun part. Let's map it now. Please use the chat bot. So chat, not the chat bot, chat. So please mark where Wysa is in your mind on this one. All right. B, B, C, A, B, D, E. Jitin, wow. A, B, D everywhere. All right. So who has not spoken yet? I would like to get somebody who has not spoken and has written B. Nobody's there like that. Okay. Let me get Aniket. Aniket, can you please come on and talk about why do you think it's BC?
Yeah, I think demand-wise, there's no confusion that we've sufficiently proven the demand is there. Only the tech side is, as we discussed, the harder part of really analyzing the pretext or utterances into some clinically safe elements. That is the part that I think is harder.
Okay. Ankur, why is it E?
So I think there is definitely latent demand. The category I think is still building up, even across, let's say, well-aware individuals. At same point in time, I think the tech, I'm assuming the realizable tech that we're talking about here is entirely to do with what you explained about how their tech specifically is very, very clinical.
And what is the momentum? Is the momentum from E going towards B, or is it going towards some other direction for the need?
So I think that's more to do with how market is operating than just Wysa operating. So I think overall market is moving upwards for sure. But I think it's a slow one because it's more, it's highly personalized. It's very, very, inhibitive in a way where nobody wants to be, very open about these things. So I think it may stand a strong chance to move towards B, but at this point in time, it looks like even as an overall category, it will remain somewhere across E.
Okay. All right. Gives you a different perspective. Our perspective was that it is somewhere here in B. When we invested, it was definitely in E. But in the last 6-7 months, we have clearly felt that it is strongly moving towards B with the kind of need. So the B2C market has its own characteristics, but the B2B market is opening up for them because more and more people want to make this available to their customers or their employees or whatever the B2B part of that is more and more, right? So we are seeing a very increased, and with COVID, the demand has further surged, right? So we do believe that even if they are not here, there is a strong momentum, at least for now, towards B. And tech, I think more or less everybody is sort of in this two columns. So there is no this thing for that, right?
I agree with you, Manish. If it has to be looked at from a B2B angle, then the momentum would be much, much higher, I believe.
Much higher, yeah. Right. Okay. So now, just a perspective on this. By the way, I should say that if the companies are in D or E, it does not mean that you don't invest in it just by that definition. But you have to make a calculated choice and judgment whether the market momentum will help them go to A or B respectively. Because unless they get there, you won't unlock the traction, right? Okay, shall we move to the next case study? Oh, we still need to do one more slide. So this is a little bit of a summarization of the thoughts we already had. So it's not going to sort of change anything in your mind, I think. So how we evaluated the core tech was obviously we went into deep dive on the product and the tech, understood all the algorithms, how they are playing around with it, etc., etc. And we also played around a lot with the product, just like Love was telling about his experiments. So it's sort of an, we looked at inside and we looked at the output of it as well to verify what our hypothesis is. Why was it a 10x difference is obviously there is a need side of it, which is the digital platform is the only way to scale, etc. But we also felt that their NLP engine was significantly differentiated from people around them and therefore we felt that they could cater to that 10x demand need that is happening over there. Timing, we felt again, it's a bit repetitive of what I already said, that we felt that the need was compelling. But at the time of investment, the biggest question in our mind, and also the founder's mind, to be very fair, is that when will the monetization unlock, or will it ever unlock, or will it become a sort of a free app which people just download, use it, and then throw it away, right? So that question was very big in our minds, and it's coming together now in a year's time. Looked at all the other products. We actually tried it. At least 3-4 products we tried, which are the leading products in this category. And then again, we tried them and we felt it was better. Although some of our team members felt some other product was better, but overall we felt that we could still bet on this because it was right up there and significantly differentiated in a few dimensions. And obviously, with the team wise, I think there is a series of conversations. We've already done a lot of our founder evaluation, but even in the tech evaluation, it plays a bigger role, because when you go and deep dive the tech product, how they're able to communicate their tech understanding, how they're able to communicate their product understanding, what kind of depth do they show in it, that actually helps you understand whether they are tech independent or not, right? They have an independent thought process, they have that ability to take the tech forward, even if you don't understand it that well. Any questions on this? Okay. Now let's take the Agni-Cool question, right? So again, we will do the same thing. So let's quickly talk about the core here. Any quick comments? I'm just bringing my chat here. What is the core innovation of Agni-Cool?
Single piece 3D engine, 3D
okay.
printed.
All right. Anybody else?
Making, enabling smaller payloads.
That is what they end up doing, but what is the core tech innovation?
Yeah, I would agree. 3D
printing the
printing,
whole
yeah.
engine as a single piece.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So I think this one is easy to understand. It is actually the core innovation is the fully, I should have written it more carefully actually. It is 3D printable rocket engines fully. I mean, the people have been doing it in parts. So a typical rocket engine contains how many parts? Anybody? Typical
5,
rocket engine? Huh?
5,000.
You haven't read the deck, man. Who has read the deck?
1,000.
The people who have read the deck are speaking now. So it typically contains around 1,000 parts. So a 3D printed rocket engine can all print that in one piece, right? And why is that important in the context of rocket science? Why are parts such an important part of this whole? Why are we trying to eliminate parts?
Every part has to be outsourced to somebody else, and then they add their margins. Here we don't need to do that.
That's an economic. I'm talking about tech here.
There's an integration aspect of all the parts coming together that has to.
And that leads to what?
Points of
why is it a bad thing?
Failures.
Points of failure.
Points of
Complexity.
What are the points of failure?
The stress points.
Yes, exactly right. It's ultimately it's a if a lot of parts are there, and then it has to sustain through so much thrust pressure while going up in the space. I don't know how many G's it is. So there are multiple points of failure occur when there are multiple parts, right? That's point number one. And point number two is what you exactly said, right? All these parts have to be put together. There are supply chain becomes complex. It becomes more cost to put them together. And it also adds to size. When parts have to be put together, they don't fuse very well. And there are connectors and other things come. So you can't make that a miniaturized rocket engine, right? So that is actually the core innovation. Just to take this concept a little further, that is the top level core innovation that you see. But to enable that, there are at least 20 more small innovations that they have done to support the entire rocket in the similar thing. So for example, they had to come up with their own fuel tank design with composite material, which can withstand that pressure, which is also small enough to fit in their rocket engines, right? Because I can't take the traditional, I can't take a smaller rocket engine and such a big tank for fuel, it won't work, right? So they had to design many other things which had to support this core innovation to go forward. But their core came from a fully printed, 3D printed rocket engine. Absolutely right. Okay. So what is the 10x difference here? What is the 10x difference they can create in the market with this?
There's a time to launch aspect which has been drastically reduced.
Okay. Anybody else? Launch on demand. Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, cheaper, smaller payloads on demand.
Why is it cheaper?
As we mentioned, because of the parts, I think the complexity gets reduced, the supply chain, but also there is a huge manpower cost in integration. I think that also is significantly brought down. I think they mentioned about 50% for their rockets.
Absolutely. I think all of you actually said correctly here in parts, right? So basically, uh, you know, you can launch on demand for a small rocket at a similar cost range. So we call it cost per kg. Today it's in the $40,000 per kg range for a bigger rocket. And for a smaller rocket, you have to pay a lot more premium, or you have to wait for a long time to get into a rocket, right? Because there's a small 10 kg satellite going into a 1,000 kg payload. But there is a tech bend on this, and I'll explain this a little bit more in the next slide probably. But it is not very easy to make smaller rockets with the same technology at the same cost unless there is a change in technology, right? And that's what, because of the 3D, they were able to hit that 10x mark. Any
Manish,
comments on timing of the market? Yeah.
One quick question about the pricing. That $5,000 per kg is based on the assumption of a full payload, right?
40,000, not 5,000.
40,000.
40,000. Yeah, $40,000 per kg if you want to send something to space. Was that your question?
No, I mean, I was just trying to make sense of like this metric that they're presented in this deck that let's say somebody needs to send a smaller satellite, right? Like, and they can use Agnikul, and otherwise they have to wait for 22 months. If they don't wait, is then the cost $40,000 per, or if they wait, the cost? Yeah.
If they wait. So there are two things you can optimize. Either you can optimize for the time or for the cost, right? So if I want to launch tomorrow, then I will, let's say I'm a 10 kg satellite and there is a satellite going up, payload going, there is a 100 kg space. So what I'll do is, because I need to just go, I'll buy that 100 kg payload space, only 10 kg will go. So my cost per kg goes massively up, right? But I can get it tomorrow. Or other way around is I need to find that hole in a payload which is 10 kg, if it fits me, which will be at my price point, but I may have to wait a long time. Right? So that is a trade-off.
Yeah, thank you.
Timing? Any comments on timing?
Yeah, CubeSats are becoming, coming to, are maturing.
Yeah.
There are many frameworks for actually putting together CubeSats and nanosatellites.
Sure. There's a lot of activity happening on the smaller rocket side. And I think next two slides, I will explain this more, because for us, that was actually, the next two slides were critical in our decision making, and I'll tell you why. Any thoughts on alternative competition and differentiation?
In competition, they didn't talk about the LA company, Relativity Space, which I don't know. I didn't get enough information whether they are doing the same size rockets, but they are also doing 3D printing, and they are, I think, about to launch this year. They didn't talk about that company.
Sure. So I will also have to look up. But actually, they are not the only ones. There are 25 plus such efforts in the progress. Okay. Around the world, coming from different angles. Some people have done partial rocket engines with 3D. Some people have done parts of it, etc. And there are other innovations, right? So this is not a very it's not a space. It's not a place where people are not innovating. They're innovating massively, actually. And it became a harder decision for us to bet on a team that they can still win on the global playing area with all these companies innovating. Our belief is that a lot of these experiments will die down, and only 5-6 people will probably rule this market. And one of the other things that helped us build conviction and hypothesis in some ways, that no other efforts so far have been on the fully 3D printable engine so far of our knowing, right? And they have been partial.
Just to add to it,
yes, please.
Your point, relativity space is in a very different payload segment. It's much higher.
Got it. Okay.
Thanks, Rupan. and a strong understanding of the tech and supply chain. This we really felt while going to them and meeting them several times, right? And then we understood, and it was great. I mean, I was so elated, and I'll talk about some of the biases that also crept in the process a little bit later. But just going back to college and understanding some of the things which we never understood in college when they were trying to teach us about fluid mechanics, etc. But it was awesome to understand from the founders, and during that process, we realized that they have a lot of depth. They were able to answer the third level, fourth level questions very easily. So these two slides are actually, yeah, right there, relativity space. Thanks. So these two slides, me and Rupan actually worked on it, and this was actually this actually gave us a very clear idea. So what you see here is this is the payload capacity that is out there today, and what are the options to launch these payloads today, right? So if there is a 300 to 500 kg payload, then you have X Space, Land Space, ISRO, Skyroot, Virgin, etc., etc. Whereas then we mapped where is the demand going up, right? So number of satellites launched in the period of 2015 to 19 with respect to weight, we saw there is a peak actually in under 60 kgs. There are lesser number of satellites here, right? Can you guys see the demand and supply mismatch here?
Yep.
Yeah, so this is the launch weight peak, right? Whereas this is the launch capacity peak, isn't it?
Is this supply skewed more towards this side because of economics or any other reason why?
Yeah. I will come to why part, but can you see that so this is important just to take a moment and see. Sometimes, see, most of the concepts, like when we try to map it on that map, right? It is not very easy to figure out the demand and supply gap. But in this case, we were able to visualize this actually as clearly as this, and that was a big thing that for us to make conviction that there is more needed, to do here than here. So coming to the other question now, that is an important question, right? Why is this capacity here, and why can't all these players go and attack this here? Any thoughts on that?
Actually, Manish, if I could ask one question before
yes,
that. Is it understood that, I understand that, it would be great if anybody can shoot their satellite, as and when they want. But is that a real need? Like, is there a real need that every single satellite has to go on its own?
No, it doesn't. So that's where we are sort of misunderstanding the concept a little bit. That's an ultimate rendition of what they can do. But let us say I have a 2 kg satellite, right? So Agnikul comes in, I think they can do 3 configurations if I'm not mistaken. I think 30 kgs to 100 kgs. Rupan, you can correct me. If I have a 2 kg satellite, right, and I still need to do in a 30 kg satellite, my problem reduces, but it doesn't go away, right? I could buy a 30 kg satellite, but then I need to combine lesser of them, right? So therefore, since the satellites are shrinking in weight, you have to shrink the launch capacities. Otherwise, the problems of the mismatch between the time factor and the cost factor will just keep going.
Okay.
Right. Jiten, this question, you can Google it up. There are a lot of reports around it. I don't have at the top of my head on the chat that you're asking. 542 satellites. Who were they launched by, right? So there are a bunch of companies. Obviously, it's not just one company. So coming back to the very important question, because that actually helps us understand what this topic is about, right? We have to still go and understand the tech intelligence. So why is it that there are so many players? Question number one. Why is it that these players can't go do this?
Actually, Jiten's question is very interesting and very important, actually. Going back to Shamik's session, that this is the sub-market. So who are these people in the sub-market who are launching these, and do we have the channel?
There are a bunch of companies. I said I don't know the top of my head. There are a bunch of companies. You can Google, you can find it yourself.
Sure. No, I was just I realized that that's a very good point to sort of understand the sub-market and the channel to reach that customer with your product.
Correct. So there are lots of them. There are lots of them, actually. Most of the companies which are going in geosensing, communication, etc., they are moving away from bigger satellites to a lot more number of smaller satellites and in lesser orbits than higher orbits.
Yeah.
So there is a massive demand over there, lots of companies in that space. So again, coming back to the tech question, right? So why is it that there are so many players here, and why can't they do this?
I think the focus is more around reusability of launches, and that is why they would want to probably take bigger payloads to make some economic sense out of it. At least SpaceX is what says to that.
Okay. Anybody else?
Could be underlying economics, just bigger payloads, the kind of use cases that enables, and therefore underlying economics of who wants that service.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that?
I don't know. Obviously, I have not done full research. So, but is it because what you said earlier that developing on a smaller size require fundamental innovation in manufacturing?
Yeah.
But I know that relativity is 3D printing. Maybe they're not 3D printing the whole rocket. But if you have to do a single piece manufacturing, then maybe innovation is required, and hence.
Yeah, I think that's closest to what it is in my understanding as well. So most of the space rockets are actually built like a Diwali rocket. There is a fuel tank and you light it up and it just goes up, right? So that's how it is built. And you could use the same technology, bringing it here. But the manufacturing challenge of building a smaller, so these are all hand built. Literally each rocket is built by hand under those dust-free environments, etc. They are not built on an assembly line, just to compare, right? And therefore the cost of manufacturing these is extremely high. And I can't do that. I mean, the same technology actually you can use here to put the point, right? If, let's say if I take the cost out, if I take the cost out of the equation, these guys can develop a smaller rocket. They easily can, because I just need to scale that down and build it. But it will be massively expensive. So if I have to do, and then if it is massively expensive, then I'm not offering anything new to the customers in this space, right? I might as well use a traditional channel and pay a premium and get there. So in getting these, in addressing this market, the price point is a very important consideration for technology to optimize for. And therefore, the new kind of manufacturing process only can address this need and not here. And a lot of these companies might be innovating and they might come here. But right now, there are only few players, I mean, 20, 25 players who are trying to innovate through different paths to address this market. Is this point clear? Because this is a fundamental thing on how do we do tech evaluation, at least for this company.
May I ask, Manish, is the design defensible to reverse engineering? Because 3D printing is available to everybody.
Yeah, it is very hard in my opinion. So 3D printing is just a method of printing it. But if you open that engine, that you will know how complex design is inside to be able to make that 3D printable. So it is not very easy, I would say.
Manish, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay,
yes,
cool.
Now we can. Yes, Jiten.
Yeah, I know. As in, I wrote that question because I was speaking, but I guess you guys were not able to hear me. My actually, the question actually is also relevant because I have some experience in space tech, and what from my understanding, in 2017 to 19 were the most number of launches done, and most of them were done by only 3 companies: SpaceX, Iridium, and OneWeb. And I don't want, and I think there would be a skew because of that. And also they have long binding contracts. So these 542 satellites, let's say there are more 1,000 more being launched in the next 10 years. SpaceX is going to launch all of them, most of them. And they will actually,
sure about that, Jiten,
not sure about that, definitely, definitely. But because, the skew right now over here will also be there in the future projections as well, obviously. Right. And SpaceX has their own space launchers, so they won't use anyone else's, from what I could say. Right. Because they can time it pretty well to what they have in their books, basically, of who's going to launch satellites.
Sure. So I think there are
a couple of point that
yeah. No, it's a valid. Yeah, go ahead.
They're also kind of mixing up the launch guys and the end customers. So SpaceX and all are probably the channels, the launch vehicles, but the end customer could be someone like OneWeb, or also a lot of academia institutions and all, also.
I think Jiten's question is valid. So he's saying that if most of these are launched by only 3-4 companies and they already have long-standing contracts, then where will the new player come in and how do they disrupt it, right? So I think number one is that if you go and that is true actually, what you have said is true. But if you go and Google out and how many other companies are trying to do this, a number of satellites, that is actually massively increasing in the next few years. And we've talked to a couple of their customers as well. They've already have LOIs waiting in the wings for them. So the market trend on this is more towards more companies trying to launch, right? Number one. Number two, SpaceX is actually not today optimized to launch smaller satellites, right? So because there is no other option, they didn't have an option but to tie up with them to do it. So they are actually paying premium, or they bunch satellites. If I have to launch, let's say, 2 kg satellites, 100 of them, then I need to get to a point where I have 200 of them ready and then only launch them as one. Otherwise, I still go into the same issue of time and demand, time and price thing. Point is valid, but our diligence showed that there is a scope here rather than not having a scope here. Okay. All right. Please shoot your answer on the chat. Where do you think it lies? Which zone? CE. Okay. E. All right.
Manish, can I ask a question while this is happening?
Sure.
Any insights on the innovation on materials they have to do?
Yeah. I take that question in the next slide, please?
Sure, that's fine.
All right, let's see what the responses have come. C, E, 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 B, E, E, B, C, B, C. So I think this is, one thing is clear, that it is not a simple tech. So we are all aligned with that. I think I see a difference between whether it is hard or harder and whether it is latent or apparent. So let me pick two people here. Arun, why don't you talk about your BC analysis?
So as we clearly saw, the requirement is huge right now. It's a huge unmet need, especially with these tiny satellites. There's a huge demand for those going up and not enough ways to make that happen. So which is obviously it's right on top on the demand graph, and it's hard tech. So I was conflicted between harder and hardest.
Yeah.
So I easy. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Acha, let's talk about, let's get someone. Jiten, why don't you come in? CE. Talk about CE. Jiten.
Yes, as in it's definitely hard tech. Space is not easy problem to solve, and the rocket launching, everything is definitely hard. The E part, basically what I feel is there is definitely a need, but we would have to see how the ecosystem grows to actually see there is an apparent need for something like this.
Sure.
Because there are other solutions, and also there is a lot more end result that has to be shown by Nicole to actually say that they meet the needs of everyone who needs them. Basically.
I think that's a very good way of putting it, right? So absolutely. So it is somewhere here, and the momentum is probably the market momentum, perceived market momentum is this side. But as you said, we could be wrong in our judgment on that. Okay, let's move forward. So how did we validate this? And I'll come to Sudesh's question in a minute. So obviously the core tech, right? Now, I think the digital products, in my opinion, are slightly easier to diligence from a tech perspective. These becomes harder and harder when they go out in the beyond digital space. So I think one thing that me and Rupan, we actually got involved in this a bit more, is when they visited their facilities in IIT Madras and saw the engine from inside, went through their designs. That's where we started to feel and get an understanding of how complex the tech is, right? And once we were able to see insides of that, then it actually made us realize that there is a lot more to it. And remember, all the context that we talk about, without that, just okay, it's a complex engine, but doesn't help us to understand. So, but the penny dropped in our head when we actually were sitting with them in the lab looking at all the designs. To answer your other question on the core tech, Swadesh, there is a lot of material science innovation as well. So it is actually in other parts, right? So there, for example, their fuel tank engine is made of a composite material which is very light, but can also withstand the pressure that it needs to go through. So in that, it's not a core innovation per se, but their composite, there is a composite that they have come up with is their own, and the design of that wall along with that material.
Okay.
Okay. 10x demand. I think that demand supply curve and the what we just went through, actually we felt that there is a need for it. And Jiten's point is absolutely valid. We did think about all that, whether it will be dominated by one players or not. In fact, I know of a couple of investors whom we were trying to bring in the round, and they felt otherwise and didn't take that call. So that was a judgment call that could have gone either way. Timing, we've already covered that. Market research shows that small satellite launch need is going massively. Alternatives, we talked about this already based on analysis. I think we felt that once the design and also the team, by the way, these guys are so capital efficient, it blows my mind. They raised only $500,000 before we invested. In $500,000, they had a printed 3D rocket engine with them. We were able to see it physically, right? If some of you have not yet seen the deck, there is a picture of the design rocket engine. I should have put it in the deck here, actually. In the deck, you can go and see it. It looks very simple from outside. All the complexity is obviously inside. But $500,000, how many companies would go and be able to do that? In the projections, we believe that with a very little amount, they can actually get space qualified in next couple of years. And this team part sort of remains the same, right? It just a lot of in-depth conversations, reference checks, talking to them, asking them questions of different kinds, etc., etc. That gave us the confidence on the tech and the supply on the team.
Manish, I have a quick question on the team side.
Yeah.
So, how do you guys evaluate the advisors? Like their advisors were also pretty impressive on the deck, but as venture capital, I've heard, like as an entrepreneur, I've heard both sides of the story from VCs.
Sure.
That some of them don't like it, some of them actually discount it. So,
yeah, but in this case, I think it was useful. So there were two people which stood out. I mean, they have very good advisors, first of all. But two people stood out in our analysis. One is almost a co-founder, that is Professor Satya from IIT Madras Combustion Lab. He's actually a worldwide authority in rocket engine combustions, and he spends a lot of time with the team, and that gave us a lot of confidence because we were able to meet the professor also in the deep dive. He gave us a few hours to actually talk about everything that we wanted to validate. And the other gentleman, I'm just missing his name. But he's the guy who designed the ISRO satellite, and again I'm missing the name. Sorry,
RV Parmual.
RV Pramod, is it? Okay.
Parmual something.
Perumal, I think. Perumal, right?
Perumal,
yes. So he was the gentleman who designed the first ISRO rocket, right? So he is actually on their advisor. And apart from that, we were able to talk to a lot of folks in ISRO through them. And they have a very deep connect with ISRO, with a lot of advisory flows from ISRO team. So one of the things in rocket science that you would, as you would imagine, right, it's not very easy to test. It's not very easy to test what you have designed. So there is a lot of review which happens. And ISRO team has actually reviewed their designs multiple times over. Full-blown reviews they have done. So that advisory really worked for them, in my opinion, in this case.
Manish, just adding on to Love's question, sorry. But also in Wysa, the strength of the clinical physicians, advisors that they had was pretty impressive. So for in your experience, while evaluating like really deep tech startups which are in the VC area, do you feel that there has to be a strong advisory team, which has immense quality? Does that play a role?
I will answer this way, right? Suppose Wysa had, by the way, that time they had only one or two advisors, right? So let's say Wysa did not have that advisory panel, which would we have invested? I think my answer is probably still yes. So it didn't make a difference because we were convinced on the team and the product, whether they have good advisory or not. But in the case of Agnikul, it did make a difference because this space is very complex in terms of getting something from here to the space. And it did make a difference to see what kind of effective advisory they had. Yeah. Okay. I think I'm done with the case studies. I can go to the next topic unless there are other questions on the case studies. And let me just see the time. Yeah. So, so this gives you some context on how to do the context of tech. I think Just the tech evaluation part, if I talk about, which is the next topic, then how do you do core tech? I think this is a question I get from a lot of people, not just other investors, founders. We continuously keep getting that. How do you evaluate tech? And this is where I would say that this is a little bit of a specialized skill. And if you have done a lot of product development in your career, then it becomes easy. But if you haven't, then you have to rely a lot on the context and then use a lot of your common sense to be able to do this. There is no method to it, or there is no shortcut or silver bullet to it. It's just ultimately translates into breaking the entire tech down in terms of architecture, technology, constructs, data flow, etc., 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 in a series of conversations. What I have found to be very useful in working with founders is that if in the first or the second pitch, you can pick up a tech nerve, right? What is the nerve center of that tech, and build a discussion around it, then a lot of the hypothesis building becomes easier. You are able to see where the core is. You are able to see the 10x. You are able to answer those 5 questions in a much more easier way. And quite often it has happened in those discussions with the founder also takes something back from the discussion, because it's an exploratory brainstorming session that ends up happening on the tech. This is, I have found in multiple places, it builds some mutual respect as well. So that in a way is a slightly shortcut to find out in the first second pitch whether they have depth in the matter that you are looking at before you go into deep dive. Let me just stop here because this is a very important point, and see if there are any questions on this.
So Manish, an example would help here. So tech nerve as applied to say Wysa.
Yeah. So there the tech nerve was 2-3 things, right? One is so many NLP bots are there. So what is it that about you that is significantly different, and how have you trained it, right? So we got into that discussion of what is the core premise of that NLP bot, and what is the core premise of understanding sentiment and emotions and everything, and what is the core premise of being clinically safe here, and how they have built it, right? In terms of Agnicol, the tech nerve was the 3D engine, 3D printed engine. We didn't realize the significance of it till probably the second or third discussion, but that was a tech nerve. With different companies, there is always so tech nerve is nothing but picking that core innovation, if you think about it, right? And if you can train yourself to pick that core innovation in the first to the second pitch and build a discussion around it, the rest of the framework becomes slightly easier to unravel.
Okay. And I'm guessing you're looking for defensibility here more than anything else, right? So
no, it is not just that, right? It is because defensibility is just one element of it. How innovative it is, whether it will really solve the problem. Sometimes you get into a space where the problem is actually simpler and you can solve it with very simple tech, and this is too much of it, right? So it is a lot of factors around it that you want to see and assess whether it is an apt technology for solving that need aptly, and whether it is scalable, whether it can grow, whether it will it has a path of its own to become to defy the normal momentum of tech, which sort of brings you to the left side, etc. So there are many parameters in this, not just the defensibility part, I would say.
okay. Do you also look at how much proprietary technology have they built to achieve that?
Yes. So I will come to that. We do. We definitely look for IPs that could be in the form of proprietary technology, trade secret, patents, etc. The other element that I want to talk about is about how to talk to experts, right? So our experience has not been great in talking to experts, because experts typically are cynical, and if you go with a broader question, then you will get a negative response. So just to tell you one example here, we invested in Niramai back in 2017, and we talked to many breast cancer specialists, right? A lot of them, about the need for early detection, whether thermal can solve that problem with AI, etc. You won't believe, but every single one of them told me, do not invest, do not touch this company, it will not go anywhere, right? Every single one, not a single person said, okay, there is some hope. That is the level of negativity which we were facing at that time. So we had to really stick out our head and then go back to them and ask specific questions. Okay, what is the problem in early stage screening? Is Mammo not able to see it? To do that, I actually went to Dehradun, where my sister is also a pathologist, sat with a radiologist. That actually became post investment, but it helped us this thing. So he actually showed me the graphs, right? So then I didn't ask him whether this is good or bad. I asked him, what is your problem? Why can't you detect it early? Then he showed me pictures or the mammograms of women under 45 years of age, which are early. And he showed me that why is it so difficult to pick up abnormality which looks like a normal structure, right? So that insight actually helped us in understanding what to ask for experts and then how to go and validate the tech. And by the way, in my career, Niramai is one of the companies, the only company, for example, so far where I've actually sat and done the code review with them for the technology, not because of diligence per se, because I just got so interested in how they were solving it. And it helped me answer a lot of questions on what they're doing. So one important part when you bring in the experts is, if you don't have your own hypothesis, then you will get lost with experts. So you need to have your own hypothesis. You need to have your specific questions that you need to ask, and then go back and validate, and then see whether it's holding up or not. In this process, you actually depend a lot on team's inherent understanding of tech, because you will never be the expert in that field. So what you are trying to assess here is whether the team is expert or not on that tech and product, right? And if that is so, then you have half of it, half the battle is won right there. And something that we are learning slowly, but surely, is about residual values, right? So if you invest in companies which don't have that IP proprietary technology, then their residual values tend to be lower, and then it becomes a struggle when they don't do well. So in our portfolio also, we have one company, I will not name them, but they have a great product, really good technology, and they've not been able to get the right nerve on the market fit, right? So they've been struggling around, and there we feel that even if they don't hit the market fit, there is enough tech there within the right time frame, of course, because the natural momentum of tech, they can be sold to some other company just for that technology, and therefore it creates some sort of a barrier to protect our investment.
So Manish, just quickly asking here, like, how do you calculate the residual value of these IPs?
We don't. We can't put a number on it, because it's a very, at least I have not been able to put. I think it's a more of a question whether there is a residual value here or not, right? Because there are a lot of businesses where there is no residual value, where there is not enough, the IP and the tech is not of great value. So it's about assessing not a number there, but assessing whether it has residual value or not of significance, and with time, how will it change? Any other questions on core tech validation?
So, quick question on Agnikul, Manish. So, the IP, is there a lot of process-related IP as well? 3D printing, sure, but maybe the way they put it together, etc.
Just to be clear, 3D printing is not their IP. The design, which is 3D printable, is their IP.
Sure.
Yeah. And they might be having some process tech as well, because I know for sure that the way I think Sudesh will know this better, the way they form the tank, right? There is a whole process of stretching the material. So that process is their own proprietary process, if I recall correctly. So there are actually a bunch of IPs in that whole product. It's everything you open, there is something in it.
Yeah,
because
I
they
think
have to re-innovate the entire piece.
As you said, like there is something on the material they're doing. There could be IP on the process as well, in terms of, for example, there could be some post-treatment. I am not aware, but just putting my material science hat,
sure,
there could be some post-process or post-treatment.
Yeah.
That could be an IP, or how do you transition from one part of the engine to another while 3D printing. There could be a bunch of process IP as well. Obviously, I'm not aware.
So wherever there is material science involved, there is typically some process IP involved. Typically.
Sure. Okay.
let's move on. A little note on last two slides, actually, just in case you're wondering about time. Uh, uh, we do a lot of AI companies, and of course, we've built a whole thinking around it. So we, first of all, what we do is we categorize AI companies into AI first and AI second. So AI first companies are companies which are solving a problem which can only be solved by AI effectively as of today, right? So Wysa is an AI first or AI second? Quickly.
AI first.
AI first, right? You can see that it's very, very difficult to build that engine without AI. You know? But there are certain other companies which actually can solve a common problem, but AI makes it better. So we have several examples in our portfolio, like Locus, which is primarily an AI second company, although there are certain features in Locus which are AI first. And then we have another company called CSB, Customer Success Box, which is a SaaS platform to measure customer success. That whole platform works without AI, and now they are building AI on it with the data they have. So that actually gives us some classification on companies. It has implication typically on what kind of problem they are solving and how defensible they are, because typically AI first problems, AI first companies typically disrupt the space they are in, typically. Whereas AI second companies end up being an incremental innovations most of the time. So you have to weigh that as you go along. And it has implications on the algorithms. It has implications of incubation times. It has implication of how do you get data and how can you get stuck with it, etc. Because for an AI first company, I can't build an MVP till I have AI working, and I can't have AI working till I have data, right? So everything gets stacked up. But for an AI second company, because I'm not dependent, I can go out in the market, sell my product, and as the data built, I can build AI on the back, right? So there are different implications of that in our analysis. The second thing is, looking at the data strategy. So within data strategy, there are multiple things to look at. One is whether they are working on proprietary set of data like Miramai does, like Citapel does. I would say to a large extent, Wysa does, versus public data which is available. Like a lot of X-ray companies that you might have heard of, there's a lot of public data sets available there, and therefore we have found difficulty in backing some companies in the X-ray AI space because everybody has that data, and it's hard to figure out the differentiation between companies. Cost of acquiring data is also very important. Recently, in fact, there was a company which met us, which used DNA sequencing as the first step to do anything else. And the DNA sequencing cost was so high just to build their 100, 200 database. They wanted some 300, 400K US, right? Which was a very expensive thing. So it became a hurt. It became a stumbling block for them also to build an MVP, for us also to take a bet. So cost of acquiring data sometimes has to be looked at. And then the last concept there is, and there may be more actually, just top three maybe, is the half-life of data. There are certain data which over a period of time tends to hold value, but there are certain type of data which tend to decay in the value. Like you may have some proprietary data today, but tomorrow more and more companies will publish that, and then you can have it. You can lose the edge over there. Like for example, there is an initiative, I've forgotten the name of that initiative. I think it's done by someone in Stanford or someplace, where they have, it's a not-for-profit initiative. They've said that we're going to publish all the healthcare data out there in the web, whatever kind, right? And therefore then companies which are working on proprietary healthcare data may suddenly lose their value on that democratization. And last but not the least, a lot of people, there is a common belief that data is the king for an AI company. In my book, that is not so. In my book, there is a lot of big role algorithms play. There is a lot of big role a normal software architecture and engineering plays, which is not AI also, to create and get the best out of the AI algorithm, right? So there is, I think, at least in our investments, we've paid a lot of attention to what kind of algorithms they use, and that also becomes a good discussion around with companies, that whether these algorithms can be improved in this way versus that way. There are so many techniques, so it also becomes a good engaging point with the founders to engage with and understand their understanding of AI, and we also learn in the process. So actually, I'll give you one example here. Maybe there's a company in our portfolio called Switch On. They do industrial automation for their clients, and there was a problem that they came across where they had to identify cigarette packets from a camera in a factory to figure out whether cigarette packets are deformed or not at a very high throughput rate. And this is a typical visual engine training method, and they could have done it many ways. But the problem they were facing is that it was actually had to be built on anomaly detection, therefore that they know what a good packet looks like, but the bad packets could be in so many forms. Sometimes the film is torn, sometimes the box is crushed, etc. So they created an inception based neural network, which I thought was an overkill in the beginning when they first presented, but it could train on as less as 10-15 images of of a proper box, and that became their IP, because when a new SKU comes in the chain, they were able to retrain their model and get that deployed very fast, right? So that's another way of really innovating on the algorithm side with the same set of data. And in our thesis, we call it the AI 2.0 thesis. We do believe that there is a lot of room for companies which innovate on the algorithm so that they need lesser data to get to the same level of accuracy. Because when AI is getting more and more democratized, there'll be a lot more competition, and companies that will separate great AI companies will separate from the good AI companies by having lesser data requirement to train to get to the same level of accuracy. So those things are important to understand and get deeper into as you evaluate tech with these companies. I guess it's a little bit of a heavy topic, but any questions or anything?
Yeah. So, Manish, I was just wondering, like, as we know, as a VC, there's never like full information that you can get about any market or any product. So, what are the other risk factors that you look for? Do you think about scenarios that could go wrong? Because the value of failure in both of these cases, Wysa and Agnikul, is very high. Like, for example, if a suicide happens when a person is using the Wysa app, loss in tenders, or in case of Agnikul, if a rocket launch falls. So is there any sort of insurance that you look into, or like how do you de-risk those things?
Yeah, we actually cannot. So that is a risk you have to take. And then the way you de-risk it is by understanding what they have done for it, right? So we went into the clinical study. Actually, the clinic, I think it's a company called Orca, Rupan, correct me. There is a third party which has actually verified the clinical effectiveness and safety of the app. So in this case, we had an external validation as well, but we also did our own validation around it. And then that's a bet you got to take. In Agnikul's case, there are actually very specified regulatory constraints that they have to meet. So they won't get a launch permission unless they meet those regulatory constraints. And those regulatory constraints actually are around the topic that you're mentioning. So there is a lot more people who know about it, and that's a risk we have to take, that will they be able to go through the regulatory constraints. They won't get a launch permission till they actually satisfy some of those conditions. But we went and understood what it is, and we also understood how they are taking care of it, and that sort of gave us the confidence that yes, these guys understand what it is, and there is good design element in it to take care of some of those situations.
Manish, when you evaluate the companies, do you always have to have like an IP in terms of their AI know-how? Or let's say, for example, there's a company that's solving a good problem in a good market, but using something like Google Cloud AI or like some other resources to that solution.
Yeah. So I think the question is, how do we look at companies which are using off-the-shelf AI engines? Is that a correct summary of your question?
Yep, correct. Yep.
I think
solving a good problem in a good market.
Those find difficult to get past us, because we then are not able to convince ourselves of their moat unless the problem is so big and there is some other differentiation that they have which sets them apart in some other orbit. So far, we have not been able to convince ourselves on any company which has used off-the-shelf AI engine. Having said that, in this whole AI stack, there is a lot of things that you can reuse, and you should reuse. You should not build what you can reuse. But then there is a proprietary AI engine in most of our AI companies.
Got it.
Okay. Last thing is about biases, which I thought, it's slightly delinked and slightly linked with this topic, but I thought it's good to talk about. So one is the incumbent bias. I think we've already covered this. I think fundamentally, I believe that people who have been in the business tend to give a negative opinion about that business most of the times for an innovation which is disrupting that business. So for me, I have experienced this, that I've actually worked donkey's years in video compression a lot. I have a couple of patents as well in this field. And it was very difficult for a video compression startup to get past me, because I would just think that this innovation won't work, or there is an issue here, or I'll see all the negative downside of it. Initially, when I was not aware, then I was falling for it. But when I got aware, then I was reassessing my own threshold on it and my own assessment on it, right? On whether I should or I should not. So incumbent bias is very important. It lies in all of us. So typically, if you are a doctor, for example, you will tend to, and you speak to them as we do healthcare investments, you typically get a negative opinion. And this plays out very well with my sister, who's a pathologist. And whenever I'm investing in a healthcare company, I call her. And the first time I was not, but now I'm fully prepared to hear why it will not work. And it is in a way good, because it gives me answers and questions to go back and think about a different viewpoint on it. But if I'm not aware of that bias, then I can misinterpret those questions and drop some things without doing my work. The second is the reverse of that, which is the familiarity bias, right? So each one of us come with some background, and suddenly you see something which attracts you because you understand it and you know it, you fall in love with it. So just like the video compression startups were finding it hard to get by, but in my initial days, when I saw some innovation on video technology per se, it used to really attract me. And I've made some mistakes in that by cutting checks without doing diligence, right? So just like there is an incumbent bias, there is a familiarity bias also that you need to be aware of. Third is an innovator's bias, right? So this I have experienced personally. So I've worked almost 18 years of my career in a lot of innovative products, and last 10 years I've been in the ecosystem pretty much. But even today, because I think I'm an engineer at heart, if something is present, someone presents a good innovation to me, I feel like doing something for them. And if I can do capital, I'll do capital. If I can give time, I can give time, right? So there is something that draws towards innovation. Also always draws me out. So there could be an innovator's bias if you have been from that field, and then you got to be a little bit cognizant of that and make those choices. And the last but not the least is actually the confirmation bias, which actually plays very, very high in all factors of our not just tech evaluation. So I'll give you one example of case study, which is a famous case study. You might know it. How are we doing on time? We are already exceeding. So let me not ask that as a question. So essentially, there is a study which says that in an interview, in a job interview, the decision is made in the first few seconds, even before the candidate has opened his mouth or her mouth. It is just that first feel of the candidate, you instinctively make that decision. And then what is the rest of the interview about? It is about confirming that decision that you made in your subconscious, right? So it has often, I've been guilty of this. I've often found that for certain candidates, which I suddenly liked, I'm giving them more hints to solve that problem which I have given, etc. And there are certain candidates which I didn't like, I'm giving them harder problems, and the interview is becoming harder and harder, right? So I've experienced that myself. And that confirmation bias plays very big role in our investment decisions and discussions as well. So again, just like we talked about the other day, you can't get rid of your biases, but you can get aware of them. And if you get aware of them, then you will be able to use them to your advantage rather than disadvantage. I think the final thought here is that, just like Shamik was saying in the afternoon session about being a skeptic or a believer, I do believe that as a venture investment, I think this duality of thought never leaves you. You are always holding two opposing thoughts at the same time for anything that you are evaluating, and it really, really challenges your ability to go and see and build conviction one way or the other, without becoming a skeptic, and the other way around as well, becoming a skeptic but not losing the belief, right? And how do you navigate those biases and those opposing thoughts to make the right decisions? That's it, folks, for this one. Any questions? Does it make sense, first of all? Because this presentation is something that I made. We didn't have these frameworks, by the way, as we were evaluating these companies, but I think it was going in the back of the mind. So it took a little bit of a time and work to draw something out of this, to present a framework which even people who have not worked in technology can use to at least unravel the entire context of technology and maybe and answer most of the questions. So that was the attempt at this.
Manish, Swadesh here. I think both the sessions were very, very interesting. I think very sort of well thought through frameworks and helpful, strategies.
I think for tech evaluation, those biases uh, are still fairly useful. I think. I mean, the sense if you're familiar, that actually helps. And if you're an incumbent, I think it allows you to validate and evaluate the technology a lot better, I suppose. So.
Okay. Yeah. See. I have been actually saying that our your biases are your advantages, right? But unless you are aware of them, they are not advantages. So that is the point, right? So uh, I don't know whether this is making sense, but I just fundamentally believe that awareness is a very, very key skill to become a VC. And then you can use the same thing as a skill. The same bias can actually help you or not help you depending upon whether you are aware of it and then accordingly moving from there.
Okay. Why would, say, a video compression startup not get past you?
Because
can you elaborate?
because it was very hard for them to convince me that they have done something unique, because it was obvious for me what they're doing, and I was thinking that somebody else will do it, or it was not a good enough innovation. The bar was very high.
But that's a good thing, right?
Well, it need not be, right? Because if my bar is higher than what it needs to be for becoming a business which can make a disruption, then I've lost that opportunity, right? Love, you are on mute, but I think you have a comment on William.
I can give you another relatable example. Like, so in 2009, somewhere early 2009, when I was in IMA, me and my friend, we kind of started a Practo-like website. And we had started building a MVP and had a thesis, but that idea did not pass my incumbent bias, because I was coming as a doctor and I was like, no man, doctors are never going to waste time on, putting up schedules. They have lines of patients in front of them. They don't need to source patients, etc. So, but Practo did happen, right?
Manish, for let's say a non-techie like myself, how do you approach whenever kind of you get such an application, how would you go about making the first step towards it? Because
I think that's a
so
good
vast.
question. And that's why I spent a lot of time on context of tech. So just step back and look at those frameworks, right? So in applying those frameworks, where do you think you will get stuck?
Just understanding whether it is even realizable, really hard. I mean, simpler is much simpler to understand to a large extent, but the difference between harder and hard, I think, is where the essence of contemplation also lies.
Understood. So can you assess whether it is simple or not simple?
To a large extent, yeah, I guess.
I think that is 80% of the problem solved.
Sorry.
Because harder versus harder, you actually talk to the founder to figure out, because most of the times you will be also investing when there is some MVP around in digital products, right? So you are already have some evidence of realizability, correct? Okay. So then I don't need to go inside, but I can see the output of it to make sense whether it is or not. It becomes very hard in enterprise products, for example, to see some of those things, but in a lot of things you can actually see an MVP working. And enterprise products, you can't see it, then you go and talk to their customers who are using it or MVP products. The one aspect I will tell you is, the more you develop this ability, the better seed investments you can do. Otherwise, what will happen is you will need to see that visibility, and you will actually, that timeline will shift, right? Because I need to see a realizable form of it. So if you are getting into deep tech investing, there is no shortcut in it. If you are not from a tech background, figure out a way to appreciate tech or context of tech. Context of tech is non-negotiable, whether you are from tech background or not.
I think context of tech is largely more realizable basis a strong business background. You understand what problems are getting solved through tech and all that. But when it comes to deep tech, which is where your proprietary is in technology.
So that's what I'm saying. Even in the deep tech, the context of tech solves 80% of your questions. But in the context of tech, there is a tech question about core innovation. And what I'm saying is there is no shortcut to it. Over a period of time, you got to develop that.
Got it. It's a rolling thing.
And it has to go in the gut. It has to go in the gut. It has to come to you in the first 15 minutes of founder pitching. What is the core here? Right? If it is not coming to you in the first 15 minutes, that means you're not there. That is a conscious ability.
Either I am not there or the story narration is not coming across.
That is also possible.
You have to be aware of that. Yeah.
But then your power of questioning comes, right? You can, if there is some material here, then the first 15 minutes you will be able to triangulate to something which is answering your question. All I'm saying is that that's a good benchmark to set, that the first 15-20 minutes, is that coming through or not inside, is a very good mark, whether it has gone to your gut or not.
Got it.